Happy New Year, and welcome to Strictly Business. I'm your host, Penny Font. This podcast features conversations with Louisiana's most influential CEOs, entrepreneurs, and community leaders, with the goal of providing insights, ideas, and inspiration to help you and your business grow. Strictly Business is brought to you by the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Without their support, this project would not be possible. Before we begin, here is a brief message from our sponsor.
The East Baton Rouge Parish Library believes that a thriving business community is good for us all. That's why we help entrepreneurs start businesses with tools like Gale Business Builder. Keep commerce rolling by providing access to computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi at 14 branch locations. Get a library card. Grow your business at ebrpl.com/business.
Thank you. We want to keep Strictly Business as interactive as possible. So for those joining us live, here's an icebreaker question for you. Submit your vote in the comments, and the results will be posted at the end of the podcast. I'm joined today by Cullen Talley, founder and head coach of Exit Momentum, an Inc. 5000 coaching firm based right here in Baton Rouge, supporting more than $1 billion in active client revenue. Cullen works with leadership teams around the country on strategy, execution, and organizational health, and he's known for a style that's candid, direct, and relentlessly focused on results. Today, we're talking about strengthening your leadership edge, what CEOs and executive teams must do to stay competitive in 2026 and beyond. Cullen, it's great to have you here this morning.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Let's start with the landscape that leaders are entering right now. So for many, 2026 already feels heavier. Tighter expectations, tighter margins, tighter talent pipelines, and so on. What separates leaders who gain an edge from those who get overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to challenge the question, right? Is that actually true? Because while that is true in certain industries and certain size companies, it may not be true in there. So be careful how much macro information they're taking in. And I always encourage our leaders to go back to what are the facts? Like what do we actually know? And sometimes those are internal to the organization. Sometimes those are external. But oftentimes I find the conversation is floating a little bit in the ether, and it's not really grounded in the facts. And so if they'll do some of that for themselves, both in the industry, the markets they serve, and for their company in particular inside their company, because I think oftentimes that noise is coming from outside. What's true about what's going on with their team, their financials, their pipeline, those kind of things I really think help ground that and sometimes it isn't great. And sometimes there are pressures, but let's make sure that's true first.
That's a great point. Thank you. When you look across the companies you coach, where is the leadership edge being lost the fastest right now?
So two things. One, we're very fortunate to be able to coach companies across the country that are growing really, really fast. And so many of them have had, lead at a leadership team level. They were the leaders that were driving the organization and helping the other folks execute. What's happened for a number of them is now there's a second or third level of leader, which is a different kind of development. And so the leadership edge sometimes is lost because it's getting diluted and they really haven't planned for this emerging leader in the organization. The other piece to me is when you start to think about the folks that are coming into our workforce now, they have different values, different ways of communicating, which I think is wonderful and beautiful. But if you're not prepared for that, you're actually speaking a language that may be a little bit different, right, in terms of what they expect and what they want. And so you're losing an opportunity to attract some of the best talent if you haven't really figured out how to communicate to a new group of emerging leaders and emerging talent that we're getting in the workforce now.
Yeah, I love that diversity. What does leadership discipline look like in a year when markets and teams are demanding more clarity and less chaos?
I think less is more, honestly. For us, for teams that we worked with in the past, that certainly we've got to have financial discipline and we're going to make the financial projections. When we think about our goals, our vision, our strategic plan, we've been really encouraging people to do less, to have fewer goals, fewer things they're focused on. Be clear about your yeses. Be clear about your no's and be clear about your not right now. So I'm not saying it can't be there for forever, but we're starting to see teams where they maybe used to have 7, 8, 10 goals, get down to 4. Like these are really the things we're going after this year. And so it allows a team to understand this is what matters. Does that mean we're not going to do other stuff? No, there's opportunity to adjust and grow depending on how the business performs during the year. But let's choose less things So you're clear and your team's clear. We can come back to that, because if we have too much, it just becomes chaos.
Absolutely. Being more targeted is always a good thing.
Yeah.
What's the most underrated leadership skill executives will need in 2026 that they may not even realize yet?
Yeah, I think to me, it's just because of this age of, everybody's obviously talking about AI. There's a lot of content getting created. There's a lot of analysis that can be being done. And it's like, what is the right amount of that to do? So again, it's just there's an overwhelm of content and information, especially starting about what's being created by different industry groups, other competitors, and so forth. And so you can get distracted by that. And so it's really going to be about focus. What are we focused on? Going back to the last question, which is, what are the key things that we are committed to as an organization this year, that we say, hey, this is our plan. This is what we're sticking to. We're going to pay attention to those things, but we're not going to be overwhelmed by all of that. We know what's best for our company in our industry.
Absolutely. So, a lot of leadership challenges trace back to how leaders think and decide, not always just what they plan. Executives often think their problem is strategy when it's actually decision making. How do you diagnose the difference?
So in our world, there's some tools that we use in particular, an issues and opportunities list. We have a short term and a long term. And so if I see the same thing kind of bouncing around on that list, and we're not actually having clear plans to knock that out, or saying, hey, we're not working on that right now, and it's kind of hanging around, that's a pretty good indication that it's really not about the vision. It's about the accountability and the execution around this thing. And they're not always simple to solve. But if we're not making material progress, if I can't look 2 or 3 weeks ago and trace, oh, we figured this out, we got that information, we made this move on a person, we contacted that vendor. If we haven't done those micro movements along the way to actually make a difference, that tells me this is not about vision. This is really about execution and accountability.
So true. If you could eliminate just one decision making behavior in leadership teams, what would change outcomes the fastest, do you think?
Yeah, this is a tough one. And it's a hard one for people to hear. But oftentimes in organizations, we are still holding on to a person or people that the company has outgrown. And I want to be conscious of the value they have provided to the company, because the hardest ones are the ones that have been with us for quite some time. But as organizations grow, they can outgrow somebody. I'm not saying they have to be removed or fired. That's going to be your decision. But bottom line, we have to be honest about that. And oftentimes there's a lot of stories and a lot of, well, but they helped us do this. And all of that is true. And we can honor and appreciate those people and do it respectfully. But we have to make the call that we have somebody in a position in the organization and the company is suffering because of it, or at least hindered, I should say, in terms of that. And so that is honestly the hardest thing, because, the owners that we're so fortunate to work with, and leadership teams, and they love and care about their people, truly. They want to see their teams win. And so when they really have to look at somebody who's been a material contributor over the years and recognize that the company has passed them by, it's one of the toughest things they have to face. But when they do, it literally unlocks all kinds of things for that team and that company. And every single time, Penny, they tell me, why didn't we do this 6 months ago, 6 years ago? And again, it's tough. It's tough.
That is a tough one. So, you're known for being direct with leadership teams. What is the most common truth they really don't want to face?
Yeah, I think it gets back to the people component, and then sometimes for themselves as well, just, the edges where they have to grow. And so part of my job and part of what my teams, as we build trust over time, is they know sometimes I'm going to deliver some bad news to them about some growth that they've got. And so it's a little bit of self-reflection and recognizing they have some blind spots in terms of, things that they're committed to. They've got some biases that still exist in terms of sunk cost bias, for instance, or, again, people that they care about and so forth. So those are some of the tougher things that we have to deal with many of our leaders and owners.
Gotcha. So let's talk about alignment and misalignment inside organizations. When a company loses momentum, where do you look first? Vision, communication, accountability, or somewhere else?
No, accountability. I mean, to me, it's like, is it documented, right? So the first place I'm going to look is help me understand what system you're using. Certainly we have one that we use, but as I like to say, there's many ways to the top of the mountain. We just believe we have a really good one. So I want to understand, where is that being recorded? Because oftentimes there's a lot of meetings and the next meeting sounds a lot like the previous meeting and there's not really anything documented, or there's this, master document that's got, it's a spreadsheet that's got 13 tabs and 40 lines on each one. And so it's just kind of a mess to track. And so I'm looking at what is their execution rhythm, whether it's a daily stand-up, a weekly meeting, the monthly things they do, the quarterly things they do. So I want to understand what the kind of the drumbeat of the business is, and then ultimately where is that documented in the simplest way possible.
I think I might be able to relate to some of that, unfortunately. Um, what are the early warning signs that a leadership team is aligned on paper but not in practice?
It's really the meeting after the meeting, right? So we have the meeting or we have the get together, and then it's the email outside of the group. We're not willing to have those, what I like to call collisions of creation, right? We don't have to be mean, we don't have to be disrespectful, but there's sometimes, if we're building something that matters and we're doing hard things, there's going to be different points of view. And so are we willing to have those collisions of creation where, Penny, you and I don't see things the same, and I have a perspective that's different than yours, and it might get a little messy, and I might have to come clean it up afterward and say, hey, I was a little bit out of line there. I got a little more passionate than I expected to be. But if they're not willing to do that, and we're starting to have the meeting outside the meeting, or these other threads that are starting to get created, that's an indication to me we've got that problem.
I love that phrase, collision of creation. You've coached companies through major growth. What structural mistakes are most likely to surface in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's, are they set up for where they're going, not where they are? The biggest problem we see, whether a company's doing $2 million or $200 million, is that they have a structure that has worked to this point. They really have not planned well, kind of 6 to 9 to 12 months ahead. I'm not talking about 2 or 3 years from now. Too much is going to change from there. So we don't have to stack all those assumptions on top of each other. But have we really thought about, obviously, people being the biggest resource of every company, the biggest expense? Have we done a great job planning for what we need in terms of capacity, skills, and development of the existing staff, or realizing what we're going to have to bring in from the outside? And so that's the biggest challenge, because you can't do that overnight, right? I can go buy another truck. I can buy some more inventory. Maybe I can buy another building or whatever it may be. But like bringing the people in and having them fit into our culture, be effective and all that kind of stuff, it just takes time. Now, we obviously help teams do that as quickly as possible, but there's still a component of time necessary for that.
Where do teams inadvertently create drag that leadership never sees?
Yeah, to me, it winds up being the things that have to actually come back to leadership. So it's like every decision comes back to leadership. And so, I give a number of our owners and key leaders and C-suite executives a lot of grief about some of the decisions they're involved in. There's times where we've worked with very large companies, and all of a sudden I've got an owner or a C-level executive on the phone about store number 5's vacuum cleaner that's broken. Like, it's this drag where we have so many people involved, and oftentimes there's a pride in that I'm not above something. Like, I'm willing to help. I'm willing to take out the trash. And I think that's beautiful. And the reality is nobody can come up the organizational chart, or in our world, the accountability chart. You can only go down. So the drag really comes from having folks that need to be working on vision and strategy being pulled into some really low level execution stuff. And it feels super small, Penny. Like, it seems so insignificant. And then once teams wake up to that, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, not that the time that it took, but it took my brain out of something that only I can do. I'm the only one who can build the projections for the company. I'm the only one that can create that relationship with this vendor or this political figure. My team can't do that. But when I'm pulled into these other things, it slows down and it causes me not to do those kinds of things for the organization.
That's a tough one. When companies grow, their operating system is often the first thing that cracks. So what execution habits separate companies that scale intentionally from those that scale chaotically?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the rhythms. In our world, it's the rhythms that they have in the business, right? If you think about sports teams or musical groups or theater, whatever your passion is, they're the ones that are great, have particular rhythms about how they run the business. I mean, how they run those organizations, and the same applies to business. So whether that, again, goes back to the daily huddle or the weekly meeting in a certain format that has very clear outcomes, that monthly financial review, there's rhythms to those businesses that they don't let go of. What we see from organizations that really are with this rocket ship is oftentimes they want to let go of some of these fundamentals that got them to that place, because now we're in the new spot and we got it. And then you'll start to see things get a little bit shaky. That's when the car starts to rattle a little bit, because they've really let go of what was core to them at that point in time. And they start to get cute about how they're going to handle that in the future, not recognizing this is exactly what created the success to date. And so they'll walk away from some of those fundamentals. Listen, we all do it, whether it's physical, spiritual, relational. We all have that thing where we have to be reminded of some of those core habits that create predictable results.
Yeah. So, is there a particular revenue or complexity level that you see companies most often break? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, so we really like to go back to the rule of 3 and 10, so that's been studied before in terms of business. And so, if there's a solopreneur that gets started at 3 people, it's a little more complicated. I got more, and then at 10, and then at 30, and then at 100, and then at 300, and it really does follow. People create complexity, not dollars. So we could talk about it, 20 million or 50 million or 175. There are certain things, and again, that's going to depend on the industry, whether construction or wealth management or software, because that doesn't always apply. So to me, we're really looking at those points at which the people communication gets harder to manage. And if you think about that, between 10 and 30, 30 to 100, 100 to 300, which is typically where we're dealing with more mid-market companies, that's where that shows up. And the cadence, the rhythm, the repetitive nature of it has to be looked into, because people are like, well, we were all on the same page. I'm like, I know, but you were 40 people and now you're 120. It doesn't work the same anymore. There's a lot more people to keep track of and make sure they're up to date. And we've got new people coming in, so we've got to educate them on how you do this. And so for us, those are the break points that we see. Again, less about dollars, more about just the humans involved.
Gotcha. So, how do leaders know when their company has outgrown its operating system or internal rhythms?
It's funny. I like to talk about it. It's almost like a gravitational pull. They can feel like it's just heavier. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's like they're being pulled back to earth. There's this, people say hitting the ceiling, or there's different terms that people use. But bottom line, to me, it's almost like, I like to think about a rocket ship trying to escape the gravity, and it's getting pulled back the whole time until it breaks through. And so it'll show up in margins. It'll show up in how long it takes people to get up to speed in terms of being successful. Hey, we used to hire a salesperson and they were productive two months in, and now it takes 4 or 5 to get there. They say, well, the products got more complicated. Is that really true? So there's some financial things. There's some human behavior. Again, these issues and opportunities that keep coming back up that we're not really getting solved. So to me, it's kind of more that micro thing versus kind of the macro. Oftentimes people want to think about just the financials, but if you go look at some of the data and you look at some of the things that have been studied in the past, sometimes the financials is the last thing to show up, not the first. And so are we looking at it in terms of, are we able to launch products on time? Are we hitting our deadlines? Are we able to onboard people? Those things may not show up in the financials for months or quarters. And so while financials matter, and we should look at those as an indication, that may be at the tail end, and we may have already been in a bit of a cycle where we're having some challenges that we're unaware of if we're not careful.
That's great insight. Thank you. What's one non negotiable operating discipline you insist every leadership team adopt, if that exists?
Yeah, so you asked me for one, I'm gonna give you two. Number one, we have a weekly meeting that we require, and it's a very specific format, has a very specific approach, and it is non-negotiable. It has to happen every week. We prescribe it at the leadership team level as well as departmental level. The other one I would say is truly a quarterly coaching conversation. So are we doing talent development with our direct reports, not once a year with an annual review with a merit increase and maybe a bonus? That's fine. But are we really sitting down and have that person do some self-assessment of where they are, trying to figure out where they want to grow? So it's not just the boss showing up saying, hey, thanks, what else can I help you with? It is preparation on both sides, both the manager and the managee, to sit down once a quarter to say, here are the wins, here are the opportunities, here's maybe some places where it wasn't so great. Here's our plan for your development over the next quarter. And oh, by the way, why don't you give me some feedback on how I'm showing up as your leader, your manager, your coach? So there's a method we use for that. But bottom line, those two things, that weekly meeting, especially at the leadership team level, and certainly depending on the size of the business, departments as well, with a specific format. And then this quarterly coaching conversation where we're really doing talent development. And Penny, you think about how much money our organizations invest in their people and how little coaching is actually happening to those folks. You'd never see that, obviously, in sports or music or other disciplines that are out there.
So true. So one of your themes is creating companies that don't depend on the founder. So you help them build enterprises that achieve that. What's the first step toward real succession readiness?
Yeah, so we love thinking about a self-managing company, right? Like if we could extract the owner out of the business, does it continue to run effectively? The first thing is to get clear, what are the core disciplines of the business? And do we have the right people in place for that? Again, for where we're going, not where we are, right? Do I have the person who's capable of handling, marketing, sales, ops, finance, product, technology, people, as some core. Obviously, there's others depending on industry, but to me, that's the first step. And then what role do I want to play as the owner or CEO or whatever? What role am I going to play in that with my people? So that's the first piece, because that really unlocks and unhooks them from the day to day, and we start to look for where are the places they're getting pulled in and why. And so when we can start to see that, because it's interesting to watch how many owners and key leaders are getting pulled into project management, or getting pulled into some basic finance stuff, or getting pulled into marketing message. It's not that they can't influence and be involved, but they're way in the weeds on some of that kind of stuff. And so we've got to figure out why that's the case. Are you somebody who can't actually delegate and let go? So is this a thing that I've got to work on with you? Or is it that we don't have the right person there at this point in time, or the right skill set? We haven't trained them to the degree where you can hand it off. And oftentimes it may be a little bit of both, especially people that have built something that they care about. I mean, this is like, if they've got 3 children, this is their 4th child, right? So this is really important to them. They're passionate about this. And so letting go is often hard, but that's the first stage, is getting clear about the core disciplines. And everybody thinks they're clear until we show up on day one at about 10 o'clock in the morning on the first day we're working with. They're like, oh, I didn't look at it that way. Like, that's why we're here.
So for executives who may be listening this morning, with companies that have no formal succession plan, where should they realistically start in 2026?
Yeah, in 2026, to me, where they should realistically start is looking at what is it that, the first thing for me is, what do you want to do, right? Like, so if you had, your, choice about what you did each and every day, listen, there's going to be some of your job that's just the suck part. It's just not fun, right? So just recognize that's probably 20 to 30% of what you're going to do. But if we could allocate you as a human resource, where would we put you in terms of that? Get clear about that first. Once you're clear about that, then we have the opportunity to figure out how we start feeling. And don't let your mind go to the place, well, I can't give that up, because stop. Like, what is the thing what is your best output? You're called to do something. You've been given certain skills. You got God-given skills that you have. How are we going to deploy those? And if you get clear about that, it helps us then start to figure out what is next. That is typically the first call and conversation we're having, is getting clear about the fact that an owner feels like they're doing a poor job, or a key executive feels like they're doing, because they're spread too thin across too many things. Well, we got to figure out what is the thing we're handing off.
So let's look at the flip side of that. What qualities do you see in leaders who are truly ready to step into the CEO or COO roles?
Yeah, there's a certain level of, humility for sure, right? Because you think about org structures, org charts, accountability charts. It's like you need to flip that thing upside down, because you're really there to serve that other group. So there's a certain level of humility and self-awareness, right, that we see. There's a certain optimism, right? So like we like talk about standing and living in the facts, but also having some living in the possibility of what's true. Not over here where everything's great and amazing, but also not so pessimistic. So to me, it's that humility, that optimism, and there's some work ethic as well, because people are going to watch your work ethic, how hard you go, and you're going to set the tone for the rest of the organization in terms of what's expected.
You're very candid about the fact that sometimes the leader is the bottleneck. You've said, I believe, leaders often unintentionally become the constraint. So how can CEOs recognize when they are the bottleneck?
It's just a number of things they're involved in, quite frankly. So the CEO, if you really go look at your calendar, go look at your emails, go look at your text messages, look at the meetings you're in, you will start to see some patterns and then ask yourself, do I actually need to be on this email thread? Do I need to be in that meeting? Could this be handled without me? Could I get another update? Certainly, we've got all kinds of technology tools today that can allow that to occur. So to me, it's really doing a deep dive and an inventory on how your day is spent and what's coming at you from the organization. That to me starts to help us unlock, hey, wait a minute, you're actually in too many places, and your calendar, your inbox, text messages, your phone calls, your conversations are a pretty good indication that's happening.
Definitely. So you have built and exited companies yourself. What personal shift did you have to make to become a better leader?
Yeah, recognize what I didn't know. Listening to some great coaching. I was so fortunate to have some amazing mentors that had quite a lot of success. And I just went to work on kind of bit by bit. I didn't try to solve it all at one time, right? I grew up in kind of a sales guy mode. I was Carried just fine clothiers in Bocage Village, working for Dr. Hill and Jeff Taquano for years, and then wound up in the payments business and on and on and on. So I started as a sales guy, then sales manager, then executive and investor. And so it's just been bit by bit by bit where I basically saw a gap in my knowledge and understanding, and either went to study something, read a book, watch video, and certainly deal with, a number of mentors along the way that were great partners to me. And just to me, I was coachable, and I guess, I grew up in endurance sports, spent a lot of years doing that, including a bunch of Ironman racing. And so that coachability for me has been the thing. I was never above recognizing I was pretty ignorant on a particular topic, and I just needed to be honest about that and seek out some counsel and some help.
So true. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So let's close this morning with some impact and local perspective. So what is the toughest conversation you commonly have with CEOs, and why is it necessary?
Toughest conversation that I have with CEOs is about typically the blind spots with somebody on the team. They are incredibly loyal, and I honor that. But the hardest thing we have to have, and I referenced it earlier, was having those kind of conversations to say, you're telling me you want to go here. I am telling you he is not going to get you here. I'm not saying he has not value as a human. I'm not saying he has to be fired. I am just telling you we can't go there with what you're saying. We can't, if we can't run those projections financially and all we're doing is bookkeeping and controlling, that doesn't get it solved. If you want to build a brand that does this on the marketing side, we have to have a certain level of skill set, and that is not there. And we don't have time based on what you've told me is what you want for this period of time. You want this to happen. We can't wait. And so that's really some of the toughest ones we have to have, for sure.
You do have the hard conversations.
Yeah.
What's a recent client breakthrough that illustrates what happens when leaders actually strengthen their edge?
So, it's interesting. We have, so actually one of your top 100 businesses, Stewart & Company Construction here in town, Dwayne Mizell and Tyler Tremonti. We had been going through and executing really, really well for quite some time, but there was a level we needed to get to in terms of what they wanted to pull off as they grew the company. And so there was a commitment to some strategic plan, some targets we had set that we were kind of generally headed toward a couple of years ago. And then there was just a maniacal nature. There was a moment that I won't forget in one of our sessions where they decided, as the 4 key leaders of that organization, we are going to do this, and this is not up for debate. And it was really a decision that unlocked all kind of things for them. And certainly their growth has been an indication of that.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Last question for you. As a Baton Rouge native, now coaching nationally, what do you see as this region's greatest leadership opportunity in the coming years?
It's interesting being here and seeing, you can kind of feel the capital region waking up a little bit. There's a lot of good things going on. Obviously, see what's happening in the petrochemical industry. We see what's happening around town in terms of some of the other developments that's happening. And so to me, the greatest thing for us right now is that you can feel the resurgence. I think for a while there, things have been a little flat. We can look at population, we can look at economic growth and stuff like that. So there's an energy and a optimism, and it's not just in certain sectors, it's bleeding over into others. And so to me, this advancement, which is why I'm so passionate about being able, even though we coach people all across the country, I'm like, I want to see that for us here in terms of that. So to me, that's happening right now in and around the capital region. It's very exciting. And we're seeing more and more clients interested in this kind of work, and that's been a little bit newer compared to some other places where they were maybe a little more in tune to coaching, consulting, and that kind of stuff. And so we can just see that wave growing. And that's not about us. That's about businesses growing and being aggressive and looking for outside help and so forth. And so it's an exciting time, certainly for this region.
It definitely is. Cullen, we really appreciate your perspective and the candor you brought to this discussion this morning. You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
And thanks also to our viewers for tuning in, as well as our sponsor, the East Baton Rouge Parish Library, for making this experience possible. Please join us for our next episode of Strictly Business on February 18th. Until then, on behalf of our show's director, Tim Coles, and me, Happy New Year, and make your day a great one.